Senator and councillors and ladies and gentlemen, first of all, good morning. And I want to begin by very sincerely thanking, in particular, Senator Eggleton for his leadership. He mentioned that there were other members of the task force, and of course there were. And that did include a seventh unofficial but very present and active member in Councillor Bailau, and also a very tiny, dedicated staff team, really, which consisted, I think, of Phil Gillies, and Phil Gillies. And I want to say thank you to all of them. And I want to just start here by pointing out what we tried to do in this. I became mayor a year and 6 weeks ago, and we, at that time, determined there was a problem here. I think that was not a sort of hard conclusion to reach. And it wasn't a problem that was new. It was a problem that has gone on for decades and has got worse, if anything, even though there have been little improvements from time to time, including in recent times there have been some steps taken forward. But if you have a model that's fundamentally broken, then no matter who you bring in, and we've had several boards of directors and CEOs and so on over time, you're not going to fix it. So what did we do? We got some of the best people that we could find, led by Senator Eggleton. And if you look at the membership of this task force, including Muna, who was there as a representative of the tenants, but others who were people who were experts in housing, and said, please, without any kind of pushing or guidance from us, please come back and tell us what we could do here in order to fix the structural problem, fix the model, so that we could then put some of these problems behind us. This was a very large-scale and ambitious project. You can see from the size and scope of this report how difficult and how complex it was and how complex it will be going forward. But these people took it up as volunteers. And I just want to say in particular about Senator Eggleton, I mean, he has proven himself over and over again as mayor, as a member of parliament, as a senator, that he cares deeply about this city and about this issue, and in particular about the issues affecting those who are struggling. And I want to say thank you to him for giving of his time so willingly. And he's even said, and I want to mention this publicly so he's bound to it, not that he wouldn't be, he said he will continue to help me and the members of City Council and the city going forward as we grapple now with the very recommendations that are in his report. So, Art, thank you very much. I want to thank as well all the people that participated in the consultations. Again, I think it should be noted that in this report it is mentioned specifically, and I had a chance to attend some of those meetings, that there were meetings held at which literally hundreds of people took part, hundreds of individual people who themselves are by and large residents of Toronto Community Housing, because it was important that we heard from them. And I want to say thank you to the hardworking TCHC employees who offered a frontline perspective to the task force on the complex issues at play in the buildings that they have the responsibility for on a day-to-day basis, and I'll have more to say about them in a moment. And also, again, the experts and the advocates and the government partners who shared their knowledge and their time. As I said earlier on, the moment I took office, and again, as somebody who's been an observer of the Toronto scene, a resident of Toronto, it was obvious that there is a problem, there has been a problem, and there continues to be a problem, a pretty fundamental problem. The model as it stands is not working, and it hasn't been for some time. We have some deep-rooted historical problems that have a lot to do with structures and old habits, and have less to do, frankly, with hard-working people who work for the corporation, who are trying to make things better. The issues faced by TCHC are large, and they're difficult, and they've been allowed to accumulate over time, a very long time. Buildings are deteriorating. Repairs aren't happening fast enough. And the backlog reached a staggering $2.6 billion before the city began to seriously invest. But as I'll repeat in a moment, the city began to invest alone, and that's not sustainable either. People told us they don't feel safe, they don't feel cared for, they don't feel respected in their own homes. They pick up the phone for service and can't get it on a timely basis. And this is not the fault of any one individual or group. It's the result of an unsustainable structure. Fundamentally, the Toronto Community Housing Corporation has been asked to provide services and supports well beyond their original mandate, which starts at being an effective, compassionate, caring, efficient landlord. And there's a very excellent paragraph in this report that sort of sets that out very clearly, and I think we have to start by reminding ourselves of that. But they've been asked, in addition to having that challenge in front of them, which they always did, to address the complex needs of a large and vulnerable population, often without adequate resources, experience, or support to do so. And as a result, we've had a variety of temporary and other kinds of solutions over time, and they've been used to mask a serious situation without addressing the fundamental problems that exist with this model. I cannot allow that approach to continue, and that is why I will accept and get behind many most of the recommendations in this report, which will, when implemented, result in significant change. We must take care of the 110,000 families who call TCH buildings their home. We have to find a better way. That is why this task force was convened and directed to look for bold solutions, and it is why we will act as a result of their efforts and their recommendations. Already, this process has produced some meaningful results. Last year, as the Senator mentioned, at the initiative of this task force, the Toronto Community Housing Corporation renegotiated and is in the process of continuing to renegotiate mortgages for many of its buildings in light of the much lower interest rates. That was a step in and of itself, conceived of and initiated by this task force with the cooperation of the federal government, that resulted in savings of more than $100 million for our city. It is something that should have been spotted and fixed years ago, but it didn't occur until this task force got involved, and I thank them for that, as should all of the citizens of Toronto, and including the residents of Toronto Community Housing, because this will help in the big task we have in front of us. Today, we have 29 additional recommendations that provide a blueprint for how Toronto can deliver better social and affordable housing in our city. And I think that these recommendations should be considered with three overarching objectives in mind. First, we need to take better care of TCH residents and give them a much stronger voice in the decisions that affect their homes and their lives. Second, we need to make sure our current social housing stock is repaired, revitalized, and maintained, and much better managed by the organizations with the right skills for the job. And third, we need to increase the amount of affordable housing that is available in Toronto at all income levels and in all parts of our city. That actually underlies all of this, because unless we address the issue of supply and demand, then the rest of this, we can make progress on the other two, but it's going to be fundamentally important that we address the issue of supply. To achieve these goals, we will take action on these recommendations while protecting the number of housing subsidies available in Toronto. There will be, as the Senator indicated, he is not recommending, and I will not be pushing forward anything that results in any decrease whatsoever in the social housing subsidies that we provide in Toronto. But other changes will be made, as they must be. It is clear that there are more effective ways to deliver affordable housing in Toronto. Sustainable solutions have been found in other cities across North America and elsewhere in the world, but there are also models right here at home. Ask yourself this important question. Why is it that we have about 240 nonprofit housing providers in Toronto, regulated effectively by the city as the service manager, but rarely, if ever, the subject of the kind of controversy that we hear about with respect to TCH on all of the things that I've been making reference to this morning? It is not because they employ people who are any more dedicated or any more compassionate or motivated about the people they serve. Our team, I believe, is as dedicated as they come, and they've been trying hard, especially in recent times, to improve how Toronto Community Housing delivers its services. But I would argue that TCH is in charge of too many buildings, spread over too large an area, and which house too many people in need of various kinds of serious social support, and that these realities are beyond the capacity of the current organization to address effectively. We need a leaner, more efficient social housing program that can more directly manage these buildings and be responsive to their tenants' needs. And that will come, in my view, as recommended by Senator Eggleton and the task force, if we adopt a much more decentralized approach to addressing those needs. Fewer memos from a smaller head office, more responsibility for people right in individual buildings and individual neighborhoods. Decisions that should and can be made closer to home, and that represent an opportunity for residents to play a larger role in their own communities. We need to take steps to improve the safety and security and quality of life within these Toronto community housing buildings. And we need more employees on the ground, in the places where the tenants live, actually addressing these needs. The present system, which ends up in some buildings with no tenant rep whatsoever, because nobody steps forward to seek the job, and 2 reps expected to speak for everyone on the board of directors, that model is not working. That, too, is in need of reform of the kind that is proposed in the task force report. The current board system, in my view, and I agree with the task force in this regard, must be depoliticized and augmented with local tenant committees so that more residents have a say. And you'll note that it simply suggests a different, and I believe what will be a more effective role for elected representatives, which is to work directly with those tenant committees in the neighborhoods, with the staff, that is going to be more decentralized if we can move this through and actually concentrate there on things that are going on in their local neighborhoods that they're representing on a day-to-day basis. At the same time, as the Senator referenced, we need to build more healthy, mixed-income communities that provide social and affordable housing across Toronto. Having now accepted this report from Senator Eggleton, I will bring it to the Executive Committee this week. It will be at the Executive Committee this week, so it's not going to be a matter of weeks or months before it goes to the Executive Committee to begin the process of figuring out how to implement some of these changes. It's going to be a matter of hours. And I will be asking that it immediately be referred to the City Manager for as rapid an assessment as possible on the question of how to implement these reforms. I will, when I bring it, ask for a report by this spring outlining the City's overall approach for moving forward with these recommendations, which of course will have to go to the City Council for their deliberation and approval, and I expect to receive a detailed implementation plan very soon thereafter. In the meantime, I would expect that Toronto Community Housing Management will continue to move forward as aggressively as possible with the kinds of day-to-day matters that have been raised in the interim report and in these final recommendations. There is plenty that can be achieved for residents without restructuring or regulatory change, including things like expanded and improved call centre service. And I know that there are so many dedicated Toronto Community Housing employees who take great pride and fulfillment in the work that they do in these communities, and I know they will continue to do so while we push forward with some very important changes to the model. The task force has now done its part. I think they've done everything that they were asked to do. And now it is the time for the city staff and for us as City Council to determine how best to move forward. And I will make this one final note. The success of this vision does depend on the participation of all levels of government and significant new funding commitments from both our federal and provincial partners. I have been entirely consistent in talking about this from the beginning. Property taxpayers cannot, I repeat, cannot bear the burden of repairing and moving forward and increasing the supply of housing in a city the size and scope of Toronto, given the nature of this problem, on their own. It is simply not realistic or fair to ask property taxpayers to do that, and so we are going to need, as we always have, the active partnership, yes, of the other governments, plural, but also of business and the private sector and the ingenuity that they can bring to this, the trade union movement, who have indicated some interest in sponsoring some of these kinds of developments, the nonprofit sector. All of us are going to have to work together to address this problem, which has been allowed to fester for far too long. I will say that, especially in the case of the province, that some of the regulatory changes that are discussed in the report, such as revisions to the rent geared to income ratios and to some of the rules that relate to landlord and tenant relationships, could be swiftly implemented at little or no cost to the Government of Ontario. This is vitally important work, but we cannot do it alone. Councillor Bilo and I will continue to move forward here at City Hall with initiatives like Open Doors, and they're designed to begin day by day, week by week, piece of land by piece of land, to improve our performance in increasing the supply of affordable housing, which, as I said at the outset, is fundamental to addressing this problem. But we will also continue to advocate to our government partners, and I hope this report and the efforts of this task force adds more momentum to our advocacy efforts. I'll add just one more thing. I had the privilege, and lest people sort of think, well, we've been hearing this tune about the other governments coming to the table for a long time. Help is on the way. I am confident of that, and I don't think it's any kind of a less than clear-eyed assessment of this. I've now had 2 visits, one of which we sort of jointly requested between myself and the Minister of Infrastructure in the Government of Canada, and the second of which was requested by him last week, which we did on a private basis, where we took him for a tour of some of the old buildings that are in the kind of state that we've been referring to today, and some of the newer buildings that show what we can do when we combine our efforts together to produce some new social housing for the people of Toronto. And I can only tell you that, like all the tours that I've had over the time that I've been the mayor, when I took him on that tour, I don't want to put words in his mouth, but I think he was moved very much by what we saw in the before, and I think he was also moved by what we saw in the after. And I am convinced that help is on the way from that level of government, and I'm convinced that we can get some of the help we need as well from the province of Ontario. I think the problem is too acute, too serious. The lives of too many people are being affected in too negative a way for us not to move forward together on this, all the partners that I made reference to. We will now take questions. If you want to indicate who your question